when they were about to face down all manner of things worse than anyone's deepest, darkest nightmares. Alex and the rest of his team did what they could to keep their spirits up. There was an old song they used to hum whenever heading on missions, the low sound of that tune giving them just a marginal boost to their morale. It never did all that much to numb the sense of impending doom the team all collectively felt, but it was better than sitting in a transport unit in silence, letting the dread get to them. Even though it had been a while since Mobile Task Force Epsilon had been dispatched on their current assignment, and they all had hummed it together as they shipped out, Alex found himself trying to remember the words to that old song. Smile through your fear and sorrow, then maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through. It was pretty hard for Alex to keep a smile on his face after losing so many of his teammates and seeing what the Grinner had done to them. The trail had gone cold again, much to the disdain of the team's commanding officer. Receiving a number of new sightings and witness reports, the SCP Foundation had sent the remaining members of MTF Epsilon, also known under the codename Tyrfing Black, out on another hunt for SCP-4910. The creature had been at large for years now, with every attempt the Foundation had made to capture it ending in grisly, gut-churning failure. 57 separate times they had sent their personnel after this anomaly on the loose, and not all of them had come back. Although Alex often found himself thinking of the ones that had returned, and seeing photos of how they had changed in the after-action reports. Not to mention the bodies. Those that made it back ended up looking virtually unrecognizable as human beings. After having seen what happened to them, maybe it was better not to know what gruesome fate had befallen the ones who were still missing in action, he told himself, keeping that train of thought private. Tracking SCP-4910 brought its own plethora of issues, naturally, or the Foundation would have secured it by now. The creature had some way of interfering with recording devices, rendering them completely useless. And of course, that meant that Tyrfing Black had little to no clue what the monster actually looked like. Given that it disrupted any and all recording equipment, including cameras and audio devices, the task force's hands were somewhat tied. It forced Alex and his teammates to try and locate it through more old-fashioned means, following up on eyewitness reports, a lot of which led them to a dead end. Every now and then, however, one of these sightings would prove to be genuine. The quickest way to tell was usually if a person living near the place where a report came in from had gone missing lately. Civilians were SCP-4910's main source of food, and a recent disappearance in the area, paired with the sighting of something large and four-legged, usually meant that the beast had come out of hiding to feed again. "All right, listen up, team," Commanding Officer Sawyer announced. With the level of militaristic speed and discipline expected of them by the Foundation, Alex and the other members of the Mobile Task Force quickly filed out of the transport and fell in, ready and waiting to receive their orders. "Now you all know the reason why we're here." Sawyer strode back and forth, arms behind his back as he addressed what was left of his unit, 3 operatives, not including himself. "Even so, it is imperative you don't forget it either. So these are the facts. Today, the anomaly designated as SCP-4910 is still running wild. But if we have anything to say about it, then that sucker won't be running for much longer." The 3 troops gave a quick chant in agreement, although Alex kept quiet, just mouthing along. He wasn't exactly sure that they would actually ever catch up to the Grinner. So little footage of the monster even existed, meaning the team still had little to no clue what this thing was, or if they were even equipped to fight it. And then again, a huge part of him didn't want to ever find SCP-4910, knowing what it had done to the fallen former members of Mobile Task Force Epsilon. "So here's the latest," Commander Sawyer continued, silencing the team. "Approximately 12 hours ago, we received a message from one of the Foundation's field operatives. This agent has been in deep cover living in a nearby town for a number of years." As he spoke, the commanding officer gestured down the high ridge that they had landed on. Far below, sitting in the center of a huge dip in the earth, was a small township. There was barely enough room for more than a few hundred people at most. All around this small urban center, bordering the entire town in an almost perfect circle, was a dense forest. It was ideal cover for the monster, and Alex could see on his teammates' faces that they all knew it too. With them in the town, there was no way they could cover every possible avenue of approach. "This operative, is he the one that called in the eyewitness report?" One of the team, Warren, piped up and asked. "That is correct, Agent Warren," Sawyer confirmed. "That agent has agreed to meet us at a rendezvous a few clicks north of here. The four of us will circumnavigate the town, stick to the cover of these woods as we head out to make contact with him. From there, he'll guide us to where the creature was sighted." The team gave little response, just a few low murmurs expressing their collective apprehension. In a strange way, Alex found it comforting that, at the very least, he wasn't the only one having some serious reservations about potentially coming face to face with SCP-4910. "Now, boys," their commander sighed. "I get it. All of us have been trying to catch this freak for a long while, and we've lost a lot of good people from our unit along the way. But we are Turfing Black, you hear me? You all know what that name means. Tirfing, as the sword from Norse mythology, cursed to kill every time it was drawn. And that's us. That is exactly what we are gonna do when we finally find this monster. For all our fallen brothers and sisters, by the time we're done with it, the Grinner will be smiling out from the other side of its ugly face. Now let's move out, double time!" With a half-hearted cheer, the squad prepared to start their hike through the forest that encircled the town. The 4 survivors of Mobile Task Force Epsilon fanned out, keeping close enough to see and hear each other, but not too close that they were clustered together. The more they huddled up, the easier it would be to take them out if the Grinner was able to get the jump on them. Although he should have been keeping his eyes forward, looking out for any tracks the creature might have left, Alex couldn't help checking over his shoulder. The sun was getting lower and lower in the sky, the day rapidly turning to night. Before long, their visibility would be compromised, severely limited by the lack of natural light. It was then he looked to his fellow team members, Warren and Jones. Besides Alex himself and the squad's commander, they were the only Tirfing Black operatives left. Warren had always been the more brash and outspoken of the group, willing to stand up and question the orders of Commanding Officer Sawyer. Alex could tell Warren was having the same worries about this plan as he was. The thick tree line gave them plenty of cover, but could also easily work to the monster's advantage, allowing it to sneak up and get the drop on the team with relative ease. But both Alex and Warren also knew that if the MTF was pushed back towards the town, they would be trapped, like fish in a barrel, just waiting to be picked off by SCP-4910. Jones was walking slightly ahead of the others, his gaze rapidly scanning back and forth across the forest before them. He was the team's most accomplished tracker, meaning he was always on the lookout for anything that could give them a better idea as to where the Grinner was heading, or if it was nearby. From scratches on tree bark, to series of inhuman, unnatural footprints belonging to a large quadruped beast, and, of course, trails of blood or bodies. If there was a sign, Jones would find it. Much like Alex, the other 2 operatives had become more than a little jaded with their ongoing hunt for the elusive entity. But on top of that, not either one of them would admit it to the others. They were scared of it too. The things this creature were capable of were enough to make anyone think twice about wanting to find it. As much to quell his own fear and sorrow, as well as that of his teammates, Alex started humming the tune to Smile, just loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough, he hoped, to not draw any unwanted attention. It was already dark by the time Tirfing Black was beginning to approach the coordinates where they had arranged to meet the Foundation agent. Commander Sawyer had given his troops a silent hand signal, and all of them had lowered their night vision goggles affixed to their helmets. Through the fuzzy green hue of the optics, Jones was the first to spot a figure leaning against a tree, waiting for them in the distance. "Sir," he whispered to Sawyer, catching his attention and then making a gesture towards the vaguely human shape in the shadows ahead of them. Looking to where Jones had pointed, Alex and Warren could see the agent waiting for them. Following their commander's lead, they paced steadily towards the undercover operative. It was only as they stepped closer that they realized he wasn't moving. "Agent Manning?" Sawyer called out to him, trying to keep his voice as hushed and low as possible. No response. Manning was still, propped up against a tree trunk. The team were a few feet from him now, while the commander stepped up to the agent and turned him around by his shoulder, only to recoil at what he saw. Manning's eyes were open but remained unblinking and lifeless. But that was far from the worst thing that had happened to his face. A huge, disproportionate grin had stretched his mouth wider than was natural. Masses of jagged, uneven teeth had taken root, pushing from under his tongue and the roof of his mouth, filling his airways with thick clusters of yellowy white enamel. There were so many new teeth sprouting from Manning's face that new, fixed and unsettling smiles had started to form, splitting open his cheeks. "Back! Back!" Sawyer told his men in an urgent, hushed whisper. "Remember, boys, we don't know how contagious this thing is." Given they had never seen it in the flesh, that was true. All previous failed attempts at bringing in SCP-4910 had ended with victims displaying similar signs of some unknown anomalous infection. Whatever it was, it seemed to have spread from the creature itself, causing human beings to overproduce masses of teeth. This started with new clusters of dentins painfully tearing through the mouth until the victim could no longer speak or breathe properly. If given enough time, the teeth would begin forming elsewhere on the body, below the neck in places they shouldn't be. The lucky ones, not that there were many of them, had managed to get themselves medical attention soon after they had been exposed. Within an hour, maybe two at best, of an encounter with SCP-4910, there was still a chance of saving one of its victims through intensive dental surgery, but 3 or 4 hours afterward, and it would already be too late. Hearing the distant snap of a twig, Jones turned with his weapon raised, arms locked in a combat-ready stance. "Possible contact," he declared, aiming his gun into the deep, shadowy forest. Matching his bearing and targeting the same area, Sawyer gave a hand signal to Alex and Warren, urging them to lock and load. Lifting their rifles, they covered the opposite direction, just in case someone, or something, came dashing out of the forest at them from the other direction. For a few moments, everything was still, although certainly not calm in the last part. Feeling a bead of sweat crawl down the back of his neck, Alex lifted a hand to wipe his face clean, the only sound being the low, panting breaths of the 4 MTF agents. That was when he saw a shadow move, just ahead of him, darting between the trees before vanishing from the view of his optics once again. It was at least the size of a horse, far bigger than Alex had expected, and able to move around astonishingly fast on its 4 legs. "Movement this side," he announced, alerting his teammates. "It's toying with us," Sawyer muttered. "With respect, how is that possible, sir?" Warren asked. "It's an animal, isn't it?" "It's a hunter," Jones replied. "We need to move. Our visibility's no good with all these trees around," the commander whispered. "On my mark, we make our way towards the town." "But sir, we'll be sitting ducks down there. It can flank us from any side," Warren argued. "We're better off down there. At least we have streetlights to help see it coming," Alex interjected, mainly just making an excuse to get as far away from the encroaching entity as possible. "This isn't up for discussion," Sawyer said, taking command. "Head for the town, that's an order. On my count, 3, 2, contact!" Jones shouted. The deafening noise and blinding muzzle flash of his weapon firing quickly followed as he sprayed bullets wildly at the shape that was barreling through the forest towards the team. Alex turned to see what was happening, only for Sawyer to yell at the top of his voice, almost drowned out by the gunfire. "Go and get out of here now!" Obeying his orders, Alex turned his heels and sprinted towards the low orange light of the nearby town, just visible at the edge of the tree line. Warren was next to him, matching his speed, their heavy tactical gear that was strapped to their bodies jostling back and forth each time one foot came down on the forest floor. Glancing back over his shoulder, Alex saw Jones had ceased fire and was running up behind them. Further back was Sawyer, with the Grinner bearing down on him. The commanding officer of Terrifying Black had his weapon raised, fingers squeezing down on the trigger. Every round he fired illuminated part of the forest for a split second. Alex couldn't make out the creature in any great detail, not while also running further and further away, increasing his distance from it. All he could make out from this far was a fleshy, quadrupedal mass galloping straight for Sawyer. He was yelling to get SCP-4910's attention, the sound of his war cries carrying over the night air. As the 3 MTF agents broke through the tree line and reached the edge of the forest, their commander's shouts quickly turned into screams of intense pain and unspeakable horror, and then fell silent. Alex wasn't sure if the creature had attacked and eaten him, or caused more of those unnatural teeth to fill Sawyer's mouth, blocking his screams permanently. Reaching the town, every road was completely deserted, gently lit by the dim glow of orange streetlights. Tiny rural stores and independent businesses had their doors bolted tight, Rolled down shutters locked up for the night, meaning hiding in one of the buildings wasn't an option. Panting, Alex leaned over and put his hands on his knees, trying desperately to catch his breath. Now what? Warren asked, the terror in his voice impossible to miss. That thing's gonna be here any second. We need to get away from here as fast as we can and then send word to the Foundation, Alex answered, speaking between deep, breathless wheezes. Tell them we need backup, that this thing is too dangerous for only 3 of us to take on. There may not be enough time for that, Jones chimed in, standing a few paces away from the others. He had been staring down the long stretch of the street they had stopped at, frozen to the spot, barely moving a muscle. Both Alex and Warren turned to look in the same direction, and there it was, only a few feet away under the light of a street lamp. It was almost like SCP-4910 was waiting for them to catch their breath, intelligent enough to know its hunt wasn't yet over. Alex, having now finally gotten a better look at the monster, instantly wished he hadn't. It made him feel sick, like there was a lump lodged in the back of his throat. The Grinner stood atop 4 pink, sinewy legs, its body just a formless mass of pure musculature that looked like it had been sculpted out of the same tissue that human gums are made from. It lacked a neck, instead having a pair of massive jaws poking out between its front shoulders, a dark, marble-like eye on either side of its head. SCP-4910's wide, almost crocodilian jaws parted, showing off what had earned it the ironic nickname of the Grinner. It presented a gaping maw of crooked, uneven teeth, with more clusters of enamel protruding from its back, elbows, and head. These teeth even formed the hooves it walked on. At this distance, it was hard to tell if the sickening yellow coloring of the teeth was purely because of the streetlights, or that they had been stained and covered in plaque. Alex tried to contain a cough in his throat, his stomach feeling like it was folding over itself at the sickening sight of SCP-4910. He started spluttering, wondering if he was about to vomit, given the lingering feeling at the back of his throat, like the sensation one gets when something is forcing its way up the esophagus, but it was lodged. The feeling wasn't coming up and out of Alex's throat, it was stuck there. By now he was wheezing, desperately trying to breathe through relentless coughs. Jones kept his eyes on the creature, who was pacing slowly towards them now, keeping a distance but moving like a lion encircling its prey. Warren turned and kneeled down to Alex, slapping him hard on the back, trying to help him cough up whatever he was practically choking on. Alex's eyes started going misty, watering up as he gasped for air, still feeling that lingering feeling of being held right at the edge of being sick. In a final act of desperation, he jammed his fingers down his throat, trying to dislodge or dispel whatever was making him gag. That's when he felt it, a cluster of little, solid pieces embedded in the roof of his mouth. Teeth that hadn't been there before, hadn't grown naturally, but had just sprung out of his flesh, and more were growing. Pain filled his mouth, spreading over Alex's entire face as new jagged teeth came bursting through his gum line, overlapping with his natural set, tearing his jaw into a wide, crooked grin. Looking up through his tear-filled eyes, he could see the same uneven smile on the face of the Grinner as SCP-4910 began dashing towards its next prey. Now go and check out SCP-323 the Wendigo Skull and SCP-2086 Man-Eating Bus if you dare to learn more about even more malicious monstrosities, carnivorous creatures, and atrocious anomalies that all seek to do harm to humans.